In the 11th century, the medieval theologian and philosopher Anselm of Canterbury offered one of the boldest arguments in the history of philosophy, the ontological proof for God's existence. Unlike traditional arguments that appealed to the senses or the natural order, Anselm turned inward into the very structure of thought itself. His claim was revolutionary. By simply reflecting on the concept of God, that than which nothing greater can be conceived, we are compelled to affirm God's existence, not only in the mind but in reality. This argument continues to spark debate among philosophers, theologians, and even scientists of consciousness. In this video, we'll explore Anselm's ontological vision, his understanding of God as the ground of being and thought, and how his insights reveal the intimate connection between imagination, reason, and divine reality. Anselm was born in 1033 in Aosta, Italy, and later became the Archbishop of Canterbury, one of the most prominent ecclesiastical figures of medieval England. A Benedictine monk, he combined a life of deep prayer with an extraordinary philosophical mind. His intellectual project reflected the motto Fides quaerens intellectum, faith seeking understanding. He did not try to replace faith with reason, but to show how reason could illuminate and deepen the truths of faith. Writing in works like Proslogion and Monologion, he sought to articulate God's reality in terms accessible to both the devout and the intellectually skeptical. His ontological argument, found in the Proslogion, remains his most famous contribution, a daring attempt to show that God's existence is implied in the very act of thinking about God. At the heart of Anselm's thought is his ontological argument. He begins with the definition of God as that than which nothing greater can be conceived. Even the skeptic who denies God's existence, he argued, can grasp this concept in the mind. But Anselm insists that existing in reality is greater than existing only in the mind. Therefore, if God exists in the mind, he must also exist in reality, for otherwise he would not be that than which nothing greater can be conceived. Though deceptively simple, this reasoning shifts the conversation. Instead of relying on external proofs, it demonstrates that the very concept of God points beyond thought to being itself. Whether one agrees with it or not, the argument forces us to confront the link between consciousness and existence in a profound way. Anselm's argument is not only about logic, but about the structure of consciousness itself. To conceive of God is already to stretch the limits of imagination toward infinity. Our minds, limited and finite, can nonetheless hold the idea of a reality beyond all limits. For Anselm, this reveals something fundamental. Consciousness is oriented toward the infinite, always reaching beyond itself. The very fact that we can think of that than which nothing greater can be conceived points to a horizon of being beyond the finite. In this way, the ontological argument doubles as a meditation on consciousness, showing that the human mind is not closed in on itself, but open to the eternal. In his wider writings, Anselm made clear that God is not a being among beings, but the ground of all existence. God is necessary being, the source from which all contingent realities flow. This aligns with his ontological insight. The reason we can even conceive of ultimate greatness is because our very existence and thought are grounded in God. For Anselm, to know God is not simply to think about an external entity, but to recognize the source of our own consciousness. The mind's ability to conceive of God reflects God's own reality, shining through thought itself. In this sense, God is not only the highest object of thought, but the very condition that makes thought possible. Anselm's argument also elevates the role of imagination in philosophy. By asking us to conceive of that than which nothing greater can be conceived, he uses the power of imagination to point beyond its limits. Reason then takes over, showing that such a reality must exist. This interplay of imagination and reason is crucial. Imagination expands the horizon of thought, while reason demonstrates its grounding in being. For Anselm, both faculties serve the journey toward God. The ontological argument thus becomes not only a logical proof, but a spiritual exercise. training the mind to recognize that ultimate reality lies beyond appearances, within the very possibility of thought itself. Anselm's argument has been both celebrated and criticized for centuries. The monk Gaunilo, his contemporary, countered with the famous perfect island objection. If we can imagine a perfect island, does that mean it exists? Later, Immanuel Kant argued that existence is not a predicate, that you cannot simply define something into existence. Yet despite critiques, Anselm's ontological proof has endured, resurfacing in the works of philosophers like Descartes, Hegel, and even in contemporary modal logic, where thinkers like Plantinga reformulated it. More than an argument for God's existence, it continues to provoke questions about the relationship between concepts, consciousness, and reality, questions that remain alive in philosophy, theology, and even cognitive science. For Anselm, the ontological argument was never a cold syllogism, but part of a larger journey of faith, seeking understanding. To reflect on God as that than which nothing greater can be conceived is to engage the deepest capacities of the human mind, awakening us to the infinite horizon in which we live and think. The argument leads us into an encounter with the mystery of being itself, where thought bends toward its source in God. For Anselm, this was not about mastering a proof, but about opening ourselves to the divine presence already woven into our existence. Consciousness, imagination, and being converge in the realization that the very act of thinking reveals the infinite reality that sustains us. Anselm of Canterbury's ontological argument remains one of the most daring attempts to tie the philosophy of God to the very structure of consciousness. Whether one accepts or rejects it, the argument reveals a profound insight that the human mind is oriented toward the infinite, and that the ground of thought is inseparable from the ground of being. In defining God as that than which nothing greater can be conceived, Anselm invited us to recognize that the longing of thought itself points to reality beyond thought, to the ultimate source of meaning and existence. His vision continues to remind us that faith is not opposed to reason but fulfilled in it, and that in the depths of consciousness we are always already reaching for God.